afternoon and welcome to Strand Explains. My name is Sakshi Shinghal and today I have the great honor to be joined by Dr. Sandhya Vishweshwaraiah. Really hope I'm pronouncing that right, Dr. Sandhya. So Dr. Sandhya is currently a professor at the Indian Institute of Sciences, Bangalore, as well as an adjunct professor at the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry at the University of Bergen in Norway. Along with that, she's also a JC Bose Fellow and has the Margdarshi Fellowship from the Indian Alliance for Wellcome Trust, as well as a World Academy of Science Fellow. Dr. Sandhya got her BSc in Botany from Osmania University, her MSc in Chemistry from IIT Kanpur, and her PhD in Biochemistry from ISC Bangalore. Her research interests are primarily focused on studying aspects of signal transduction mediated by cyclic AMP and cyclic GMP, and looking at mycobacteria and the mammalian gut as model systems. Thank you so much, Dr. Sandhya, for joining us. How are
It's
you
a
doing
pleasure.
today?
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course, we really appreciate it. So I'm, just bowled over to have you on the podcast. It's such an honor. And you've had a rather prolific career with countless accolades. I've only gone through half the list I have noted. Could you talk us through your career journey and what inspired you to become a scientist?
Mhm. I think for any scientist, the thing that inspires them the most is they're perpetually asking the questions why or how. And I think that was a curiosity that must have been inculcated in me at school itself, where you make observations about the world around you
Mhm.
and you ask yourself, why is it this way, or how can I change it if I need to, etc.
Mhm.
Now, I was always very fascinated by the medical sciences at all times. But because my primary education was done outside the country, when I returned to India, I realized that the options for me to get into medicine were restricted. So I said, never mind, let me start studying the natural sciences. And so I started studying botany, chemistry, zoology, and then went on to do a chemistry master's in IIT Kanpur.
Mhm.
Now, the reason for choosing chemistry at that time wasn't something that was a very conscious effort, more to do with the fact that my husband was doing his MTech in IIT Kanpur at that time. And in those days, the IITs did not have a department related to biological sciences. Now, many of them have a bioengineering or biotechnology department, but at that time, they had only chemistry. And I think perhaps fortuitously, that was the best thing that happened to me, because if you have a good foundation in chemistry, biology is very easy to understand and follow, because everything in biology happens because of chemical processes. And so if you understand the underlying basis by which why those processes happen at the chemical level, it's very easy to memorize or even think about some of the changes that happen in biology. Biology ceases to be completely descriptive. It can be quite mind as you look at the problem.
Mhm.
After completing my master's, it was clear that I really enjoyed what I was doing, and I could not see myself as being content with staying at home and doing all the good things that a Indian woman is supposed to do. So I joined for a PhD in IISc. I had my daughter during my PhD as well. So the family life was working in parallel to my studying. And for me, it was biochemistry. Again, perhaps because of the chemistry background that I had and my interest in biology. And at the time when I did my PhD, the Department of Biochemistry in IISc was the best in the country. And I was very, very fortunate to have been selected as a PhD student. And then, of course, there was no looking back. It had to be a career, and therefore one went into industry for a little bit, realized that industry wasn't quite my calling, and again was fortunate enough to be offered a faculty position in IISc, which is where I've been for the last 23, 24 years.
That's incredible. And it's a very cool story to hear. I mean, I know when I first personally went into biology, a lot of people said, why would you do it? It's all just mugging up stuff and
Mm,
a bunch of theorems. But like you're
yes,
saying, it does stem from the chemistry. It's all logic based and it's all just about one
yes,
reaction of the other. And that I personally think at least comes from that chemistry. So
sure.
that's really cool to hear. Thank you so much. So maybe jumping a little bit right into your research, what led to your interest in the genetics behind irritable bowel disease, sorry, IBD?
Right. So I think when I started the lab, my curiosity was still very biochemical. and very molecular. And the aspects of how cells communicate with each other is something that fascinated me a lot, because after all, communication is the basis of life in that sense. And inanimate objects don't communicate with each other, but all living objects communicate with the other. So that was the basis on which we began much of our research work many, many years ago. And what we focused on was a particular receptor present in the gut. And this receptor is actually the target of a family of bacterial toxins that cause diarrhea, especially in countries like India, sub-Saharan Africa, etc. So to maintain the relevance in the context of the Indian scenario, we started looking at this receptor from a biochemical perspective, and we realized that there really wasn't that much information available on it. So we really enjoyed ourselves for the first perhaps 10 years understanding basic aspects of biology of this particular receptor. And we did that and published reasonably well. So we were noticed in the field as having made significant contributions in understanding this receptor and the way that it signals within intestinal epithelial cells, which is where this receptor is predominantly expressed. Now, as a consequence of this kind of work that we were doing, I was approached by clinicians from Norway. I had never met them before. And this is one of the beautiful things about science, actually, that people look at your work and then approach you. So they approached me, telling me that they had identified a family in Norway, which appeared to have a predominance or a very frequent diarrheal episodes right from infancy onwards. Daily, the patients would maybe pass something like 8 to 10 stools a day, which is quite a problem, and very watery. And along with this, apart from these phenotypes, they also demonstrated irritable bowel syndrome. They had inflammation in the gut. And because it was a familial association, they naturally tried to identify the gene behind this particular defect. And they bumped into the same receptor that I had been working on for many, many years. They also identified a mutation in this receptor, which led to the receptor being obviously malfunctioning in their system. That's when they wrote to me, because they knew that we had been looking at the biochemistry of this receptor. So they said that, look, this is the mutation. Are you able to characterize the mutation in terms of the biochemical activity of the receptor? Which we did. And since this receptor is one of the causes for diarrhea, you'd expect that the mutation was a hyperactivating mutation, which resulted in overactivity in the receptor. And that was the reason why the patients were sick. Now, this was the very first report of any human disease associated with this particular receptor. And that was why it was a big story, and we were able to publish it in perhaps the leading journal in the medical sciences, the New England Journal of Medicine in the US. Now, obviously, when you publish in journals like that, people get interested all around the world. And subsequent to that, I was approached by additional clinicians at the University of Innsbruck in Austria. And they wrote to me saying that they had identified 4 children and who also showed symptoms of this severe diarrhea from infancy onwards. In their case, the diarrhea was so severe that the children were unable to even retain any kind of oral food at all. So they had to be fed parenterally for the first few years of their life. And after seeing our paper, they said, hey, look, maybe there are mutations in the receptor. And so when they sequenced the receptor, they identified an additional 4 mutations. And they wrote to me again saying that, look, based on your work, would you like to characterize these 4 mutations? And what is very freaky in science and freaky in life in general, Sakshi, is the fact that one of the mutations that they said a child had was the exact same mutation that we had made almost 10 years before, purely based on our understanding of the biochemistry of the receptor. So it was freakish to think that there was a child harboring the exact mutation which we as scientists had made many years ago. Now, we characterized those mutations, and again, as you would expect, they were also hyperactivating mutations. Now, it was thinking about the disease progression of these children that got me interested in IBD. And these children, apart from having diarrhea, again had symptoms of Crohn's disease, inflammatory bowel disease, And this got me asking, how come this receptor is regulating all this? Knew was it would regulate diarrhea, but we had no idea as to how it might regulate the other biology in the gut. So therefore, what we did was we said that, fine, let's create a mouse model which could mimic the human disease. And we did that. We generated a mouse which had the mutation that was seen in the Norwegian patients. And over the last few years, in the more recent past, we started characterizing this mouse. And we did indeed find that there were a number of other what were called phenotypes in the gut of these mice, which mimicked that seen in human patients. So now we have an animal model by which we can now start exploring in greater detail some of the aberrations that we see in the human gut that such severe disease. Now, as we were in this work, I started thinking to myself, how come that I'm getting mails only from people in Norway, people in Europe? I received an email from a parent from Australia, a couple from the US. Is it that in India, this mutation doesn't exist? And that is how I got interested in starting talking to clinicians in leading hospitals in India, asking them, look, do you have a number of instances of children who present with IBD, what is called very early onset inflammatory bowel disease? And it was interesting for me to see that there were a number of clinicians who were extremely excited about the possibility of looking at the genetic basis of this disease in Indian children. It's never been done before. What people are usually doing is using the standard genes that have been reported by others and looking for those mutations in Indian children, and they don't find them. And they don't find them for many reasons. One of the reasons is that when they get the sequencing done, the company that does the sequence doesn't apply its mind sufficiently. And so they don't look into the finer details, which we as scientists do when we start thinking about the disease in context. And therefore, we put together a group of clinicians, and we're hoping to be able to actually contribute significantly in terms of looking at the mutation landscape of Indian children who present with very early onset IBD. So what we propose to do is to try to do a genome analysis of around 100 patients along with their parents, so that we get a clear idea of the genetic basis for this disorder in these children. And very interestingly, one of the clinicians came to me with a patient in the recent past saying that they had got the genomic analysis done, but they were told that there was nothing there. I said, look, please send me the raw data. Let me look at it and let me study it. And when we studied that, lo and behold, we found a mutation in the receptor that we're working with. And this again was a new mutation. Now here again, a lot of luck, a lot of serendipity, but I do believe that serendipity comes to those just luck. You have to be aware of what you're looking for and then take it from there.
That's really cool to hear. Yeah, and like you're saying, I think in my side it cut off a little bit, but yeah, serendipity is, I feel like, a lot of hard work and just being at the right place at the right time.
At the right time.
So out of my own curiosity, so I have noticed that in India specifically, a lot of cases of IBD go unnoticed. People just think, their stomach is running and it's not too much of an issue. And so does that hamper by any chance these studies, especially if you're looking for genetic linkages? So in terms of parents who might have had IBD and not realized, but coming in with their children. So are you seeing cases of that, or how does that really affect these studies?
So adult onset IBD can be driven very largely by environmental factors. And those environmental factors could be things like smoking, the diet, etc. So if you start getting IBD as an adult, there may or may not be a genetic basis for it. It could be purely environmental. Of course, there must be some genetic susceptibility because, a lot of people eating the same food and maybe smoking the same number of cigarettes don't get IBD. So there must be an underlying genetic susceptibility, but it's not the driving cause for the IBD. Now, in children, what happens is, if children start experiencing this when they're very, very young, this also leads to stunted growth. and developmental progression, because the child is unable to get adequate nutrition orally. Now, this, of course, causes alarm bells in the parents and, of course, in the clinician as well. And so you have pediatric gastroenterologists who specifically look out for cases where very young children present. And if the parents are normal, it is very clear that the mutation is a de novo mutation in the child. And so therefore, being able to identify the genetic basis for that becomes that much easier, because it's unlikely that the child is influenced too much by environmental factors at that time. They will be either having the mother's milk or standard baby feed. It's nothing that they're ingesting at the age of 3 months or 4 months that can cause such severe illness at that point of time. So the genetic basis is likely to be identifiable far more in very, very young children. And that's the cohort that we're looking at in our study.
And I guess that leads to my next question. Most of the cases you're seeing, are they de novo, or are they also cases of hereditary IBD?
I can't tell you that we've started analyzing the data at that number yet.
Okay.
Of the few cases that have been brought to my notice, because remember, to be able to begin studies in humans, you need a lot of ethical approval in the clinical centers where the patients are recruited. And I need ethical approval in my own institute to be able to conduct such studies. Now, all of this is in the offing. We have been discussing this with clinicians over the past 6 months. Each clinical center is now going to get its own ethical approval for us to be able to proceed further. I now have to get multiple ethical approvals from my side before I can begin the work. But in the case of the few children that have come to our attention so far, most of them appear to be de novo because the parents are unaffected. But we are definitely keeping our eyes open for some kind of familial linkage. Whereas perhaps the parents had it less severe and therefore they were able to function. The children had it on a much more severe basis. So maybe 2 recessive mutations came together. We don't know.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Okay. Thank you so much. That's really interesting to hear. And I can't wait to see, bless you, I can't wait to see what comes off the studies in the future. And yeah, sometimes I think we forget, or at least laymen like myself forget, how much work goes into just starting a study like this up.
Absolutely.
On such a
Yes.
large scale.
Yes.
Yeah, that's okay. So just a question mostly from myself, because like I said, I'm so excited to be interviewing you, but you are such an inspiration to Indian women in STEM especially. Do you have any words of advice for young girls looking to start a career in the field?
Totally. They just have to believe in themselves. That's it. Now, the society as a whole may not believe in you, which is unfortunately the case for Indian women. They are categorized into being able to do certain things and not being able to do certain things. So the only encouragement I can give is that, yes, it's a tough haul for the majority of Indian girls in this country. It isn't going to be easy. A lot of it has to do with the kind of support that you get from your parents in the immediate instant, and of course the family as a whole. But I think you just have to believe that you can do it. And I understand completely. It's very easy for me to say, because I come from a background where I don't think I even realized that there was a difference between me and my brother in our upbringing at all. But there are not many parents in India who can make such lack, or who can bring up their children without any kind of distinction. Unfortunately, our tradition has laid us, into that trap. But there are girls who can do it and who should do it. And they just need to find the right person who will keep telling them, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. Now, if you have someone in your family, another woman who has achieved some level of success in her profession, she could be the sounding board for you. It could even be your father, for example, who feels that, oh my God, my girl is really much smarter than my son. And why am I not providing her the opportunity that I'm trying to force onto my son? So I think a lot of it is environmental. But if that burning desire isn't within the girl, no amount of external support can help her. If she has that burning desire, somehow circumstances around you adjust, and they allow you to follow your dream to a certain extent. But I do understand I'm talking about city girls. I just would not know the pressures and the tensions that a young girl living in some small town or some village in India faces, in terms of even being able to be sent to school, perhaps, or maybe even being sent to college. There are huge hurdles in this country, and I appreciate them very, very much. And if there's any way that anything I could do to help those children, I would do so.
Of course. Thank you so much. It means a lot to hear that from you. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure all the other girls out there listening and even their families would love to,
Yes.
are grateful to hear it. On that note, thank you so much, Dr. Sandhya. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
It's a
This is
pleasure.
very,
It's a pleasure.
very illuminating. And hopefully we can talk to you again soon. But
Absolutely. It
yeah,
would be a pleasure.
thank you. Have a great day.
Same to you. Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Sandhya.